Good morning, church. It's good to be with you all again this morning. Not unmuted. Okay, there we go. Well, it is good to be with y'all this morning. This morning I've got some good news to share with y'all. Some exciting news. So it's been a bit since we've been here, but since we were last here, we've had some exciting travels. We've finished our third term. We've started into our fourth and last term for this year. And so, yeah, we've had some good stuff going on. But even more so, me and my wife have a really cool, exciting announcement. We're expecting our first child. So be praying for us and that goes well, but we're super excited. You can come talk to us after, but we thought we'd announce it now to y'all in person rather than having someone else announce it. But yeah, we thought we'd let y'all know. So it's super exciting time for us. And we're going to keep being in school. So we're going to be pretty busy, but, it's a good blessing God has given us. So that's the good news. Something exciting to start off with. And so now that that's over, we'll get into the lesson for today. So last week we continued our exploration of the Sermon on the Mount. Not last week. It was a couple weeks ago. And we started off with exploring the Beatitudes. And these were attitudes that the Christian should have within their life that Jesus commands us to. And then we traveled on further down where we're commanded to be salt and light to the earth. And supposed to be God's presence on earth. And then we looked at the last time, we explored anger and what it's supposed to look like in our lives. We've now gone into the part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is iterating the commandments as they should be, not as the people of their time had distorted them to be. And so Jesus says, this is what my people shall do, not what the Pharisees and Sadducees have been doing or teaching. So today we're going to continue our exploration of the perfect law of Jesus that he calls his people to. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 23, if you want to read with me there. But this section is going to deal with the very challenging sin of adultery. Anger is a challenging sin for us today. It's prevalent throughout our culture, but so is adultery. It is also a challenging sin, and sometimes we don't realize that it's been committed. And so we're going to explore this passage in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 32. So if you want to read with me there, that'd be awesome. So Matthew 5, 27 through 32 says this. You have heard that it is said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out now and throw it. One of your members be destroyed, then your whole body be thrown into hell. And for it is better for you that one of your limbs be destroyed than your whole body go into hell. And it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for the matter of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. In this passage, we see Jesus give the perfect law concerning adultery. In their time, they had summed it up and just said, don't commit adultery. That's what the law teaches, the law of Moses. And he's saying, that's not the law that my Father gave you. That is not the law that my people shall follow. He says, there's more to it than that. There's a heart behind this, not just an action. And adultery is not a sin we often think about. It's not something we often talk about within our lives. And most of us will be like, I've never committed adultery. This doesn't necessarily apply to me. But there's things that are adultery or similar to adultery. In God's eyes, they're just as serious. How often do we lust? How often do we think about that problem within our lives? You see, lust is in the mind. And it's kind of hard to identify sometimes, especially for outsiders. You can see adultery in someone's life sometimes, but lust is rather private. And yet, how many of us allow it to run in our lives? See, lust is a serious thing, and it's a state of mind. It's not a fleeting thought, but a meditation that produces actions that God takes very seriously, that He says is adultery. So, we're looking at these verses, right? He's addressing lust, and Jesus says it's so serious that if the problem is your eye, then remove it. If the problem is your hand, then remove it. And Jesus, this is a common saying of Jesus. He's not actually saying remove your eye and hand. I want to make that clear, because that's not actually the problem. But He's saying it's that serious. If it was the problem, remove it. The problem is the heart. Anybody that has a mind and can think and has a heart can lust. And that is the problem that is addressed here. And He's saying it's so serious, it needs ruthless elimination from your life, no matter the cost. Because it's better for you to enter maimed into the kingdom of heaven than it is for you to enter whole and go to hell. That's Jesus' words on the matter. He takes it that seriously. Sometimes in our lives, we have to cut things out that other people, that culture, society is like, why are you doing that? That's quite odd. You know, you don't watch that TV show. You haven't read that book. You haven't been involved in these types of things. They're baffled by it. They say, you're not normal. You live under a rock. You don't listen to that type of music. Whatever it may be, it's serious enough that you should cut those out of your life. So he continues on into this passage. You know, we're looking at the heart. We're looking at this calling to discipline our mind and thoughts. But then he continues on to those who are divorced. In their culture and time, the men could divorce women for any and every reason. And we'll see that as we explore on. We're going to look at an example. Women were exploited in their culture. They were not protected. And this is not the way God had designed it. Deuteronomy 24 is where the original divorce teaching came into practice. And in their time, they had taken it too far. Or at least a group of Pharisees had. And we'll explore that more later. But they were saying you can divorce your wife for any and every reason. In their culture, it wasn't common for women to divorce men, though we'll look in a passage, there's a couple passages where we see where it happened. But it was very rare. And there was very specific circumstances around that. But the men were mistreating their wives. And it was causing a lot of problems. And Jesus is saying that's not how this should be. There's only some there's only a sin that means that you can divorce. And he's like, this culture of divorce is not good. So he teaches against that. Continuing on, so that's kind of wraps up this passage. There we go. My mind started to wander. So we've got all of this going on here in this passage. So we're going to take this step by step. We're going to first look at lust. We're going to explore adultery, but we're going to look at it as Jesus has sectioned it out here. We're going to look at lust first. And this is a sin of the heart and mind. It's desires. It's very heart-centered. And so is the second one. So is adultery. But we're going to look at lust first, and it will flow into it. So this next passage we're going to look at focuses on the mind. There's teachings in the Bible about our minds, about our thoughts, because we have control over them. The mind is the main battleground for lust, and we see this in Jesus' teachings. The passage we're going to read comes as a part of Paul's letters. The first passage comes from the church in Corinth, where they have struggled. That's the first letter to the Corinthians. And the second congratulates them on their progress, but he warns them because they're still struggling with a few things and encourages them and reminds them of what they have been taught. So the passage we're going to read is in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 6. If you want to read with me there. In 2 Corinthians 10, 1 through 6, we're going to see what Paul is trying to get the church to recognize in their time. So it says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 6. Now I, Paul, appeal to you myself by the humility and gentleness of Christ, who when I am present in person am humble among you, but when I am absent am bold toward you. Now I ask, when I am present, that I will not need to be bold with the confidence with which I propose to show boldness to some who consider us as having been according to the flesh. For although we are living in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but powerful to God for the tearing down of fortresses, tearing down arguments, and all pride that is raised up against the knowledge of God, and taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And we are ready to punish all disobedience whenever your obedience is complete. There's a lot of things we see in this passage. It has a lot of richness and depth, and we could kind of get lost a little bit in the weeds because this has a huge historical significance and background. There's a ton of different teachings here, but I want to draw out a couple of important things for us concerning lust. In this passage, we learn a couple of different things. First is that through the power of God, we can defeat the desires of the body. We are not waging war according to the ways of the world, according to our flesh, but with the power and desires of God. Second, the weapons that we fight with. How do we fight with the power of God? It tells us here. The knowledge of God, and by taking our thoughts captive and submitting them to His will. We have control over our thoughts, and we can submit them to the will of Christ. We're not powerless against them. And so we kind of start to see this development again of controlling our thoughts, controlling our hearts. This involves the problem of lust. So now we're going to read another passage in Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9, if you want to read with me there. And here we're going to see a standard of things we should submit our thoughts to. See, God doesn't leave us in the dark. He explains clearly, this is the way you should think. This is the way you should act, and it will produce something in your life. So let's read there. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 5, it says this, Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known to all people. The Lord is near. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever things are true, whatever things are honorable, whatever things are right, whatever things are pure, whatever things are pleasing, whatever things are commendable, if there is any excellence of character, and if there's anything praiseworthy, think about these things. And the things which you have learned and received and heard about and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So we see here Paul telling the church in Philippi to rejoice, to submit their anxious thoughts to God. You have power over your anxious thoughts. As a side note, that's so cool. This goes beyond just lusts. We have control of every thought that enters our mind. We choose what to do with it. But continuing on, he says to be thankful, and this will bring them the peace of God. He continues on to what we should be focusing on in our lives. So, what should we submit our thoughts to? How do we defeat lust? It's by submitting our thoughts to the list here. He's given us a pattern. He's given us a list to look at and says, don't think of evil things, think of these good things. And if we think of the good things, it excludes all evil from our mind. There's no space for it to enter because we're focused on God and His ways. We don't see or feel the peace of God in our lives sometimes because we aren't doing what is told here. The peace of God in our lives is a good thermometer for us. It's a good way to gauge, where's my heart? Where's my mind? Am I with the Lord? Do you feel His peace? Is what Paul might ask you. He's saying, look, if you do these things, if you think on these things, you will have peace. You will have the peace of God that surpasses all understanding, not the peace of man, which is subjective. And so, if you aren't feeling the peace of God, if you don't see it in your life, if you don't see it coming out of you, then assess this list. Be like, where am I failing in this list? Because it's a promise here. This isn't an if. It's not, oh, do these things and you might have the peace of God. It's, you will have the peace of God. God will be with you. So, if you don't feel at peace, something here is out of place. This is a good place to go back to if you're ever struggling with that. If you're struggling with lust, something here is out of place. Your mind is not focused on these things. So go back to here and look once again. But there's another piece to this, and we're going to wrap up the mind and lust in this section. Read with me in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Here Paul is going to give us another look at what submitting our thoughts to Christ does in our lives. It says this in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Therefore, I exhort you, brothers, through the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, so that you may approve what is good and well-pleasing and perfect will of God. Paul here just finished a conversation on God's judgment and how God will condemn the disobedient, but will show mercy to His children. So now Paul talks about what obedience to God is. He clarifies that for his readers. He makes it very clear. What pleases His God is when we present ourselves as a living sacrifice. This means we sacrifice ourselves. This means we cut out all things that are not godly and live only for Him. This living sacrifice causes us to live by not being conformed to the ways of the world. And the way we're not conformed to the world is by the renewal of our minds, so we can live according to God's will. This is done by taking our thoughts captive. We cannot renew our minds if our thoughts are flooded with evil. We must flood them with good. And the only way we can do this is through the power of God, as we saw previously. So, once we've done all of this, what are some of the results? We see this second thing actually after that, is that after we've tapped into the power of God, the way we tap into the power of God is we need to know His ways and how to tap into His power. We have to control what we think about, because we have control over our thoughts. We need to think about the things of God. This thinking is not passive or fleeting, but a meditation on God's ways. It's an abiding in it. It's living in it, reading it, being inundated with it, so that there is nothing else. If your thoughts aren't godly, your actions won't be either. The tree that is good cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit, as Jesus would say. So, what does all this result in? It results in us being pleasing to God, having the peace of God, being able to discern His will, and it makes it to where we don't live our desires. It allows us to accurately assess those around us and be able to address their disobedience because we're being obedient. It's taking the log out of our eye so that we can address the speck in our brothers. This kind of idea goes back to that first verse we read. He said, control, or not the first verse, the one in Philippians. At the very end, it says, control your thoughts. No, it is the first verse. Sorry, not Philippians. It was the one in 2 Corinthians. At the end, he says, in your obedience, when you're obedient, you will be able to stand up to the disobedient. So this leads us into that godly life. It leads us into that godly discernment, the place where we need to be. So that's the heart we should have. And so knowing that and entering into that and living in that leads to us living a godly life. But there's more than that. There's another problem that was confronting their culture, and this was one of divorce. And so we have to address this. This is part of the adultery conversation. And it's a challenging topic to cover because there's many varying views on it. And it's also a very sensitive topic because of the pain and emotion that goes deep. And I will attempt to handle this topic with all sensitivity and honesty because that's what this requires. And I only want to say what the Bible says. And it's a challenging thing. But it's a big challenge for the church today. Divorce is not talked about enough. It's not taught on enough. Divorce in the church has been a big struggle lately. It's on the rise in the church and in our culture. And so it needs to be talked about in a biblical way. It needs to be understood the way Jesus understood it. So we just have to read this and be honest with the text. But we'll do it with as much gentleness as I can and sensitivity. And often the question is, I divorced in this specific circumstance. Is that sinful? Is that okay? Does God condone it? Or does God think it's sinful me to divorce for X, Y, and Z? And as we're going to see, these are the wrong questions. Those are the questions that the Pharisees were asking him. And the truth of the matter is God doesn't want divorce ever. That was not his intended design, but it's allowed because of sin. And we'll see Jesus' response on this. But it's never okay, but sometimes it's necessary. So I first want to start by going to Genesis, because it's important that we have a foundation from where God started. So read with me in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25. Here we're going to see what God created perfectly in the beginning. And this perfection that we should seek in our marriages and in our lives, this is what's described here in Genesis chapter 2. So in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 through 25, it says this. Read with me. Then Yahweh God said, "It is not good that man is alone. I will make for him a helper as his counterpart." And out of the ground Yahweh God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and he brought each to the man to see what he would call it. And whatever man called that living creature was its name. And the man gave names to every domesticated animal, and to the birds of heaven, and to all the wild animals. But for the man there was not found a helper as his counterpart. And Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh where it had been. And Yahweh God fashioned the rib which he had taken from the man into a woman, and brought her to the man. And the man said, "She is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken from man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cling to his wife, and they shall be as one flesh. And the man and his wife, both of them were naked, and they were not ashamed." In the beginning, God created so that one man and one woman could become one. And this was a holy and sacred union where a man and a woman become one in a mysterious way. They become completely vulnerable with each other. And there's a lot of significance in this passage. It's very deep. But the basics of it is man and woman both have strengths and weaknesses. And when they come together and form one, they're complete. But when one or the other is lacking, there's a hole that needs to be filled. Because they were created to become one. And when they do, it is a creation that God made to be inseparable. It should not be separated. But that's not the way they viewed it in their time. And so we're going to look at a Pharisaical teaching that has come into practice in their days. Because we needed this foundation. We needed the basics to understand this. And they're going to test Jesus, trying to catch him. But he uses the foundation here to rebuke them. So read with me in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 through 9. And that's where we're going to see this take place. So read with me in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 through 9. It says this, "And a Pharisee came up to him in order to test him and asked, 'It was permitted for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?' And he answered and said, Have you not read that the one who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, on account of this, a man will leave his father and his mother and will be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So then, they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, man must not separate. Then he said to them, why then did Moses give us a command to give us a document, a certificate of divorce, and to divorce her? He said to them, Moses, with reference to your hardness of heart, permitted you to divorce your wives. From the beginning it was not like this. Now I say to you that whoever divorces his wife, except for on the basis of sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. The first thing I want us to notice here in this passage is the question. Is it allowed that a man can divorce his wife for any reason? And Jesus says, no. In their culture, that's what they were doing. There was two different sides. There was two different camps of Pharisees. There was Gamaliel, and he said, the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 24, says that you can divorce your wife for any and every reason that you think is reasonable. You know, she doesn't cook your breakfast well enough, or you find another woman more beautiful, you can divorce her and get remarried. That was what this side teach. There was another side of the rabbis arguing, and I don't remember the one who was over this, but he said it was only for sexual sin that you could divorce, based off of Deuteronomy chapter 24. And the reason they're testing Jesus here is they want to know, where do you stand on this? Do you stand with Gamaliel or the other? And he says, I don't stand with either of you. You don't understand the question. You ask the wrong question. Divorce was never the intended way. It was not the way God created it, but it is allowed because of sin. Sin sometimes makes it necessary because man is broken. And if you look in Mark chapter 10, verses 2 through 12, and 1 Corinthians 7, 10 through 13, and another passage in there, it mentions the other side of this, because occasionally a woman would divorce a man, or it addresses both sides of this. But we're not going to read those, but that's a key part if you want to see the other side. But here it's not addressed, it's just talking about the men. But he's saying, that's not the intended way. Do everything you can to reconcile, to not get a divorce, to stay together, to be the one in the holy union that God created. That is God's intended way. But that's not always the way it can be. Sometimes it's necessary for a divorce. God allows it, but He does not desire it. That is Jesus' answer to the question. And I want us to walk away with this. Sometimes we look for loopholes or easy ways out. Marriage can be hard. And in fact, after the conversation here with the Pharisees, and especially if you read Mark's version, it's a little bit lengthier, the disciples pull him aside and they're like, this is hard. How then can a man stay married? Because in their culture, divorce was so prevalent. And he was like, it is a hard thing, but it's the way God created it and it is good. And there's further discussion on that. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not something we have to persevere to. Marriage was never intended to be broken, and we must remember that. But we also have to remember there's sin that makes it necessary sometimes. And so we must be gentle and must be careful with this and not go the easy way out. Seek all reconciliation, but in the end, if sin must separate, then it has to happen sometimes. Just like, and we're going to look at this tonight. Divorce and this idea of adultery comes into play with our relationship with God, because He considers our covenant with Him as marriage. And we're going to look at that tonight. And when we break it, we'll see how God responds to us. And I think we're going to learn some valuable things from that and how we should respond to broken marriages. But we won't dive into that right now. We just see the principle here of how God views divorce. Something that is allowed, but not something desired. We must remember the holiness of marriage and seek every possible route before divorce. It's not something that should be done often nor lightly. It's an exception because of our sin. So we've explored adultery and lust and divorce. It's a challenging teaching, one that pervades our culture in many, many, many different ways. But we must realize this is a big deal to God. He takes this sin seriously, and it should be to us as well. And we should ruthlessly eliminate it from our lives. It is worth losing a body part to enter into heaven, or to look maimed to the culture and society around us to enter into heaven. It's more than just actions. God calls us to a pure heart and a pure mind. If we remember the Beatitudes, he talks about being pure in heart. We are called to think pure thoughts that views people the way God views people. He calls us to the perfect standards in our lives, to live as his people. It's a big challenge. It's a big calling to us. One we all struggle to strive for, but we must continue to struggle to strive for the perfection. We must answer by pursuing with all that we are. God calls us not only to pure thoughts, but also to understand the seriousness of the marriage covenant. No one should separate. Unfortunately, sin sometimes makes it necessary, but God doesn't desire this. In conclusion, we must take adultery seriously, instead live holy and pure lives. If you are struggling today with living a holy life that God calls us to, or you need to enter into covenant with him through baptism, please reach out to someone here. We want everyone to have eternal life and the blessings promised, the good life, the peace that God brings. If you are in need, come forward as we stand and sing.